welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duvall, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who travels to South America to hunt dinosaurs for sport,
Tim Longo. The irony of that intro is you broke up at one moment, and all I heard was the last word.
Oh, that's good. That's right. Yeah, because it just went out on me a little bit as you were talking, and I was like, "Oh, what's he saying?" And then you said last word. I was like, "Oh, I get what he said." So this is going to be an adventure this week.
And I didn't hear the actual intro fully, so I don't even know what the joke was. Exactly.
Okay, I said adventure that you went to South America to hunt dinosaurs for sport.
Nice. Yes, I am doing that now.
Yeah, of course you are.
True.
That is of course an allusion to our game this week, this next few weeks, which is 1996's Tomb Raider. In advance of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which comes out in just about a month, maybe a little over a month, we thought we would revisit this classic title. It's one that we've been holding off on until we had a great tie-in. And the movie this year, or last year, I guess, was not that tie-in, because I don't think anybody saw that. But no, we finally have we got this game coming out. I'm looking forward to it, and of course, Tim is himself a bit of a Tomb Raider expert, so I'm sure he'll have lots to say over the course of the series, having been both the creative director on the series on Tomb Raider Anniversary, which I think you also did some work on. Some actual implementation work. Is that right?
Well, I was creative director only on the Wii version of that. Jason Botto was the creative director of the PS2 version. Yeah, and that was that was the game Crystal did after Legend.
Right.
Legend was their first. Yeah.
But you added all those cool little archaeological bits.
Yeah, that was part of that team. That was
the motion controls. Yeah. The motion controls archaeological bits. I am not playing the Wii version. I was tempted to throw it in, but I did not have time to take a look back, and I wasn't sure if the level design would be exactly the same. So I wanted to stick with the original. In any case, Tomb Raider 1996, we'll talk a little bit about that year in games in a minute. But first of all, it was designed by Toby Gard of Core Design, which was the development team who actually built it, who are in England, I believe. Derbyshire or something like that.
They were. I don't know if they're still around.
Yeah, I don't know if they're still there or still around. It's a title that became sort of a flagship for the PlayStation brand early in its life cycle, its second year. It's especially in Europe and North America. A credit both, I think, to the character design of Lara Croft herself, and of course the mix of exploration, puzzles, although they're kind of light, and the gunplay against endangered and even extinct creatures. It was a time where mascots were a thing, I think, for a lot of companies, and they were sort of trying to figure out which ones were theirs at PlayStation, and Crash Bandicoot and Lara were really sort of the genesis of that for them. The game sold by report 7 million copies, which is extraordinary for the day, and so birthed a franchise that we still love today. With 14 games in the main series, by my count, plus a couple of co-op titles that have an isometric perspective but are also on consoles, as well as some films and some other spin-off media, comics and novels. So it's a popular franchise. It's also been somewhat popular on mobile. There's a very decent Lara Croft Go game in their Go series, but there's been Lara Croft mobile titles right along through the years. Some more action oriented than the others, and probably mostly forgettable. But that's because they were kind of in that early period of mobile when it was Nokia and stuff like that. When games are kind of just getting their feet under them. It was also, I want to point out, in 1996, a flagship for 3DFX acceleration, graphics hardware acceleration on the PC, and at least the way it was pitched to me was, this is the game you need to get a 3D card for. And I believe it was the first title I ever played that was 3D accelerated. And so therefore it also holds a special place in my heart. I did first play it on the PC. I've since played titles on both the PC and the PlayStation and maybe even on the Xbox. I think I played Legend on the original Xbox, or was that on the 360 as well? I may have played it on the 360.
It was on the 360. Yeah.
That was that right. That was a cross. Right. And I may have played it on the new hardware. I can't recall. Anyway, great series. Do you want to talk a little bit about 1996? Give us some of the other games. It's something we've talked about not too long ago, so some of these games are fresh in our memory.
Yeah, we've definitely played at least two games. So yeah, Mario 64 came out this year as well, as did the Nintendo 64, right? Was that the same year, right?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
I think so.
Hardware, yep. So pretty notable comparison from a 3D platformer perspective, and I think we're going to talk a lot about the fork in the road that the two games represent. Brett already mentioned Crash Bandicoot, Diablo 1, Shadows of the Empire, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, Donkey Kong Country 3, which I think is another one to kind of mention. Interesting thing going on there. What was the other one? Scanning the list. Mentioned Crash Bandicoot.
Resident Evil, I think, is the one you're looking for?
Yes, Resident Evil was the one I was looking for. Yes, thank you. That was, I think that's going to be, I wrote some notes down about that. I think it's going to be notable because of the controls and the tank controls that we'll talk a little bit about. And I think the 3D rendering, especially in PlayStation, of course, we'll talk a lot about probably software versus hardware acceleration. Quake 1 also came out this year. Another notable polygonal character, polygonal character based, 3D game, where that's kind of what this era was moving toward. One I just noticed that we didn't talk about in the pre-show, Indiana Jones and his Desktop Adventures.
Oh, hello.
Yeah.
At least they got our names right, is what I remember the letter to the editor saying about that one.
Oh, yikes. Okay.
Do you not remember that?
I don't remember that. No.
That game was not well reviewed, which is funny because it's a roguelike that I feel like if it came out 5 years ago, it would have been like, this is what they should have done with Indiana Jones. I mean, I think it was literally that far ahead of its time. I think in a year that includes Tomb Raider, that's not the Indiana Jones game you want to have, but I don't think it's a bad game.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. I think it's actually an interesting little thing. Another one worth mentioning is Duke Nukem 3D. Mm-hmm. So it's very, very substantial, and Civilization 2 is probably worth mentioning, though there's no real connections there. But it's a really interesting year for 3D in various, few different genres, but specifically in the platformer genre. To have Mario 64, which we've played before, and if you haven't listened to those, you can go back, and we probably referenced Tomb Raider a few times, as I recall. And Quake, those are two big heavy hitters. As a total aside, just for insider, for the two of us, Meridian 59 apparently also came out in the
3DO. That's very true.
Or on Windows for published by 3DO. So that's a friend of ours. Created that game with his brother, correct?
Yes, that's right. Andrew Kermsey and his brother Christopher.
So yeah, crazy year for an industry that was trying to figure out what 3D was, both from a polygonal character perspective as well as 3D level design, and then most importantly, I would say, is camera and combat, and what you do, when you're trying to really, immerse the player in these 3D worlds, and you have to control, because of the 3D aspect, you have to control multiple things at once that you didn't have to before.
Right.
And so that's
right. And also importantly, that you didn't have to control in games like, to a certain degree in Mario, you're not super responsible for controlling the camera. It does a pretty good job here. I found myself using the look more than I felt like I ever needed to in Mario. Partially just because often I wanted to make sure I wasn't jumping down into something terrible. And then, the other game, though, is Crash Bandicoot in particular, had a camera that you really had no need to control because it basically trailed or was directly in front of Crash as he ran around the level. So it definitely was a departure in in third person action adventure. I mean, certainly also with Resident Evil, where you have fixed cameras at different locations with pre-rendered backgrounds. So you have a lot of distinctions in how the camera works, and probably something we'll talk about a lot. Because I think it does, even though it's not perfect by any means, I think it does establish a lot of those things.
Yeah, it's looking at the list again, and I know we've looked at the list a couple times already over doing the cast, but in the context of playing Tomb Raider and in Mario 64, it is actually fascinating to see for a time, because 96 was also the year I started in the industry myself, and it's really fascinating to see the experimentation that people are going through for this particular problem, because it's really all over the map. Basically, all the games we've mentioned, those key ones you just mentioned, etc., are all handling this challenge completely differently, both from a creative perspective as well as a kind of design and technical perspective. And it's really interesting when you put all these in the same year,
Yeah.
And as a gamer in that year, getting each of these games,
right. You're learning something new every single time. And I was thinking too of games like Shadows of the Empire, where you're literally learning different camera stuff at different points during the same game. Yeah.
That was their solution.
We're just we'll do whatever the camera needs for this level. Yeah, that's a totally different
Which,
thing.
That, I mean, in that games, other genres came out of that game when it comes to like Rogue Squadron and stuff, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah, no argument. So, I mean, I think that's the right choice for that game. And a game where you're going to actually have lots of different sorts of gameplay anyway, it totally makes sense. And it's not really a knock. It's just funny. Yeah. I mean, it's literally, you're seeing every possible solution that might have some value come out in this year. I mean, not just in this year, but in this year's a microcosm for those problems. And you saw papers written either in Game Developer or in, I think in GDC, probably, although I wasn't in the industry at this time, but I definitely remember looking back at older game developers and seeing stuff. And then also in things like Game Programming Gems that would come out, a little bit later than this, you're also seeing still stuff about 3D cameras and such like. So it's a whole, it's a big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I don't know which topic we want to hit first when it comes to some of the ones we talked about in pre-show, but to hit one that Brett already mentioned, but with a personal kind of spin on it, the 3D effects and hardware acceleration was, starting to come out at this time. And probably it was either for most gamers who were PC gamers at the time, probably it was either Quake or Tomb Raider that were the two main ones that people were really like stress testing this new technology on. And it's something we definitely take for granted now, of course. And now we've moved into shaders and materials and a bunch of other new things that weren't around at the time. But the concept of hardware acceleration was just mind blowing. And I was a tester in QA at the time, and I just remember because we had pretty good. We were testing X-Men versus TIE Fighter at the time, and I remember because we all had pretty good rigs for our work PCs with accelerators on them, and we just all kind of loaded up Tomb Raider and gathered around and just could not believe our minds. Just like it was just like blowing us away. At and it's funny for anyone who's playing along with us or who has played this version of the game. You play it now and you're like, what's the big deal? Of course, but back then, man, the full immersion of that, and for me, the technology was a big part of it because I haven't played the whole game on the PlayStation version, which was software acceleration only. I believe that's correct, right? They didn't.
Yes.
It was yeah. I mean, you definitely look like software acceleration. I don't know.
Yeah, it's purely math done. There's no dedicated hardware for 3D math. That doesn't come until the PS2.
But to compare the two, was just night and day, and you just couldn't believe it. And so,
although I'm pretty sure the PlayStation also had some primitives to accelerate the math, so you could do vector math a little bit faster. Which was useful for 3D, but there's a lot of stuff that it didn't do well. And in particular, something with textures. It did not do something properly with texture clipping.
I mean, if you look at those two games side by side, those two, screenshots from those two SKUs
you can
side
see
by
a big
side.
difference. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Also, I don't think they had save anywhere on the PlayStation.
No, they didn't. They had the gems that you had to find.
Right, you could find gems and
checkpoint gems.
Right,
yeah. Definitely rough.
Yes.
For a game
I played Tomb Raider 2 on the PlayStation, and that was the one that had added save anywhere. And that was
on the PlayStation?
On the PlayStation, yes.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Of course,
I think
you have it on the PC.
Yeah.
You're not saving a ton of data, so I was kind of surprised they didn't do it to begin with, but it may have been a crunch time constraint kind of issue, and I don't know that the PC came out at the same time. I think it came out pretty concurrently, but it was probably less of a deal because you didn't really have to deal with hardware that you weren't already dealing with. You were just going to write to the hard drive now instead of reading from it, so it wasn't a super big deal to do that. Whereas on the PlayStation, of course, you're talking to a different hardware device with its own calls and things like that, and you have to do all these different things to talk about it, and just to be able to do that at any time, I'm sure it was kind of a nightmare. And they had a lot of different memory constraints as well, with just 2 megabytes of memory on the original PlayStation. So big deal.
The other thing that might have been happening that we wouldn't be able to confirm right now, but console versus PC was definitely a different world. So maybe they felt, because checkpoint saves,
design wise, sure.
That was just kind of like a accepted thing on the console. So maybe they felt like that workaround was okay, but on the PC it was a lot less forgivable. So but yeah, if they had it in one SKU, it's kind of curious they couldn't put it in both, but must have been some technical thing. But I just the immersion, and I I was excited to be at LucasArts at the time and a big Indy fan, and Brett's right. This really is the indie game that people wanted, and kind of was wondering where it would ever have come up. The biggest indie game, Indiana Jones game before this would have been The Fate of Atlantis, which was a pure adventure game for the most part. And so that was the best example we had. But this really, from being in an ancient place alone, in a solitary way, just pure exploration and just being in places that people haven't been in.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, it literally starts in Peru.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it starts right where Raiders starts. And that's kind of amazing as well. I mean, the only thing that could have been, they almost do it with the opening cutscene, not the opening cutscene, but the first cutscene where she's going up to the Peru levels.
With the partner.
She's got the hood on, right? And she has a partner who quickly dies, but you also just see the back of her, and then at some point she turns and pulls her hood back a little bit, and you see her face, and you have that moment that's a little bit similar to what's going on with Indy when he steps into the light the first time, and you see his face, in the jungle. Different sort of thing. We're up in the Andes. We're further up in the Andes, I guess, here, and he's down at closer to sea level or something in his adventure. But definitely a callback there, I thought.
Yeah, and I don't think they ever, hopefully we get a guest on who worked on the game, but I don't think they ever hid that fact too. No, I mean, the first trap you run through is an arrow trap. Things shooting out from the sides as you run by. I mean, it's could not be any more on the nose. And as you get later in, there's even a boulder that chases you down a hallway. So I mean, they're not hiding anything here, as far as where they're wearing their love for Indiana Jones on their sleeve for sure. No, I think if you were playing this year and got Indiana Desktop Adventures, you were very disappointed in what sort of experience that was. Even though it wasn't a bad game, it was not what you were looking for in the age of Lara Croft. So that was tough. That just worked out tough. Go ahead. I was just going to say the other quick call out while we're talking about sort of the immersion of just kind of entering into Peru and into these caves and ancient structures that I had forgotten about until restarting it. And I always made note of this back in the past, and then just remembered all over again when the memories came flooding back, is just the ambient audio, which isn't really a score per se, but it kind of is halfway ambient audio, halfway ambient score. I always felt like was really successful at kind of delivering that sense of exploration and solitude and mystery, and it's something that, the Indiana Jones movies are pretty much, set piece after set piece, and there's some quiet moments of exploration, but really for the most part it's it's high adventure, pulp adventure. But you're really spending time in spaces for a fair amount of time, and so you're hearing this audio a lot, and there's the creaks and the groans and the little trills and things with the way that and occasionally the music pipes up at certain sort of dramatic moments, but the underscoring of it really is always something that stuck with me and was a good partner with what you were seeing from an ambient perspective and exploration perspective. So that's one call out I wanted to make sure I mentioned when hitting that topic.
Yeah, no, absolutely a good one. I think the audioscape is really kind of interesting and fun, and understated, and it does, I think, it helps undergird sort of her loneliness. One of the things I noted reading the manual, because I was having some trouble, I'd rebound the keys to WASD, but some of the stuff wasn't working. So I ended up just using what they have for most of the game, which is the arrow keys. The control key in particular did not remap well for some reason. It feels like they missed some stuff. Oh yeah, I can't get her to shoot her guns. That usually would be
right.
Yeah, I kind of need that. But
grab ledges.
Yeah, or grab ledges, right? I was like, what am I doing wrong here? I know that you just sort of jump here and she holds on if you're holding the action button, but it's not working. Anyway, no, one of the things that I found amusing in the introduction to the character is that she has been disowned by her family, which was not something I thought was. It's certainly not what I think of when I think of the character, and I think that probably got retconned to be something different, because it ends up being Croft Manor, right, and all of that stuff, and it's more. There's more about her father as the story progresses and things like that. Certainly in one of the films.
Yeah,
it's a big part of it. So it was just kind of weird to see that, of like, she was off on a skiing adventure or something, having married into wealth, but not having been born into it. And I feel like that has just been dropped entirely in later installments, and she just becomes this other character that we think of today. But she did start as a disowned young woman who had married into her wealth and discovered that she was an amazing adventurer after her plane went down in a ski trip.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely start fleshing her out over time. I think that was probably, written in a, a very simple, basic way, maybe from Toby, who's credited as her creator, who's the lead animator on the project as well. But basically, like, if you, having worked on the franchise myself, if you go back through the original, 6 or so games, from core, with a couple others added in there. The lore, if you will, for Tomb Raider is really not much. It's
right.
It's very kind of cobbled together game by game and kind of added in. It's not really kind of fully thought through, I don't think. And so it's really minimalistic at best. And then she's I think as a segue, maybe we can talk a little about the introduction of her character and stuff. But it's very, very stereotypical in some ways, but it's interesting that they make a strong female character and a dominant sort of like resourceful female character in this day and age, but then kind of have her visually designed the way that she is. So there's this really weird contrast between those two things. It's always caught me off guard, and something that we really tried to tackle with the reboot and such visually.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Because she definitely has always been a strong character and very, very self-sufficient and self-assured. But then there's this weird
the sexualization aspect, the objectivization of the character led into some controversy and trouble over the years. I can remember a Next Generation cover where they recreated, I guess it was Janet Jackson's album cover, where she had someone's hands over her naked breasts, and they did the same thing. I think it was on Next Generation with Lara, and like Duke Nukem, not the best character to be the character behind her, because he is exactly the sort of person who'd be objectifying. I mean, it was just a mess as far as some of that stuff went, and of course, the being on the PC, there were nude mods. I mean, there was a whole weird culture around all of this sort of thing that isn't great. Although I think whatever the first strong female action hero would have probably have faced that. Maybe they over accentuated her a little bit, and that maybe led more into it. But I think that was just the nature of what was going to happen based on who the audience was for games, or who the audience was that people were marketing to for games. I should be more accurate, because there have always been women playing the games as well. But
it has a lot to do with the creators too. You know what I mean?
For sure.
Like the perspective's just not.
It just wasn't. They could have used some women on the team for sure.
Time.
But I will say that despite all of that, her visual design is really striking. She's got that, the two tones, basically the blue and sort of the beige, I guess, or brown, and then of course a fair amount of just flesh and her hair and her ponytail. So you've got a really actually kind of strong and bold character design, which I think really helps the character as well. In later games, they'd go and put more sort of different skins on her, and she'd be underwater, so they'd have a scuba gear, even though she's underwater a lot in this game. I think in Tomb Raider 2, maybe even they put her in a scuba outfit, and they just found different ways to have her look differently. But at that point, they had already established the character. That turquoise top and the tan bottoms and the twin pistols on her hips is really strong and striking and solid character design. And I think that was a big part of making her so recognizable and a franchise. Of course, the fact that the game's pretty good didn't hurt. So I think it all worked out.
Yeah, it was a franchise-worthy kind of comic book style feel to it. And in fact, Toby was, I believe, also credited, and I think I remember seeing some of his early drawings of her. So he was also the character designer as well. Some of those iconic looks. Yeah. It breaks down to a pretty simple design that people can recognize very easily. Like an Indy or a Darth Vader or something like that. So,
right.
Yeah,
or the
there's
Hulk
definitely
or
a lot of good reasons. Yeah, there's a lot of good reasons for it, for sure. And I think she's an interesting character that evolves too. I would, there's a lot of, I usually overthink this because I'm always infatuated with sort of British culture and big fan of Sherlock Holmes and James Bond and a bunch of different things from that culture. But she's also coming from a British culture. There's a bit of James Bond feel to her, with a little bit of Batman, with some of her kind of rich background, etc. Kind of.
Wouldn't that be more Alfred?
You got me on that one. What do you mean?
Well, Bruce Wayne is not British.
No, I meant. Yeah, sorry, I was jumping back and forth. Just as sort of like the trope of the rich.
Oh, right. Okay, sure. Yeah.
Playboy.
Okay. That part of it went over my head. Okay, gotcha. You're right. Yeah. No, I mean she's a woman.
Metaphors,
but she's a woman of the world, right? I mean, in that sort of intro before the game even starts cutscene, she is. I don't even remember. She's in Paris or Monte Carlo or something. She's in some
Calcutta.
Oh, that's right. She's in Calcutta, but she's in a really nice hotel. She's in this really like this marble hotel. I did actually That's right. It was Calcutta, but it was also like, but
she's
not what you think of Calcutta.
For hire.
Right. Clearly, she's. It made me think of the beginning of Temple of Doom when he's in, I guess, Singapore or whatever. Just sort of a little bit more opulent, and she travels, but she also likes to travel well. And obviously, she's a woman of means, or has earned her means through the adventuring. It's hard to say, but she's sought after too. She's well known because she specifically is asked for, which I thought was kind of interesting too. So
and there's sort of like is it Alan Quartermain is one I'm thinking.
Yeah, Quartermain.
I'm trying to think of there's another sort of like adventure, sort of treasure hunter for hire archetype that isn't Indy, because Indy was sort of like it belongs in a museum kind of trope, right?
And that's to kind of get around the cultural imperialism and appropriation issues. But Alan Quartermain is. Quartermain is
Doc Savage.
That's H. Rider Haggard. I want to say is Quartermain, and maybe like She. Is that the name of it? She.
I don't remember. But then there's the reason I was bringing kind of the British side of things is just sort of
King Solomon's Mines, of course. Yeah,
King Solomon's
Mines. He also wrote She, but I guess I don't think Quartermain is
different.
Oh yeah, She and Alan. Hard to say. There's a book called She and Alan. Oh, and She, A History of Adventure. Yeah, so it is. He is in. Those are his books. I don't know about Alan Quartermain when he shows up. He's a character that's stuck around a long time because of Haggard's works all being in the public domain. So, because he's so old.
She's definitely. You can just see the amalgamation of a bunch of different influences. You know what I mean? It ends up being, I think, an appropriately combined a number of things to make a compelling character. However, you can really see the direct references in a lot of different ways. And there's a little bit of James Bond. There's a little bit of Batman. There's a little bit of that. There's even a little, I would say, a little bit of, sort of the mystery and the sort of puzzle solving of Sherlock Holmes. And then there's this sort of, she's, I guess, aristocratic, kind of, semi-British royalty kind of feel to her. There's sort of the zeitgeist of the 90s, especially with, I don't remember exactly when the Spice Girls were around. I think it was after this, but just the sensibility of that kind of icon, kind of a British icon kind of feel. And I think that's, she was on all sorts of magazine covers, non-game related covers once it blew up, and I remember because IDOS was a publisher, and that's also a British company. Ian Livingstone being one of the sort of creative leaders of IDOS at the time. And I remember him telling
he
stories.
did like Death Trap Dungeon and other stuff like that as Livingstone.
He was one of the co-creators of Games Workshop, to be honest.
Okay,
Warhammer.
Sure.
So he goes way back, colleague of Peter Molyneux. But he remembers the early pitches of Tomb Raider by Core, and when they came in for trying to look for a publisher. And there's sort of a little bit of that British imperialism in her that has always been interesting, interesting spin. But there's also she's a gun for hire to some degree, and the opening cinematic really reflects that, right? Where there's that very stereotypical American Texan or something. I forget what that. We'll meet him later. Forget his name. And just the dialogue is very, very simple, and and she's kind of establishing her dominance, and she does what she wants to, et cetera, et cetera. And then it just kind of goes from there. There's really not much to it. It's just enough to give you an adventure to go on. You're like, okay, well,
I'm along for the ride, I guess. Yeah. She's really a sketch, but because she draws on all these sort of archetypes, you're able to just go along for the ride. What you're getting.
You're familiar, yeah.
You're looking at the car and you're saying, "Oh, sports car. I guess we're going to go fast in this thing, right?" I mean, it's not super complicated, right? Looking at it, you're not looking and scratching your head like what's going to go on here. It's very clear from that first sort of thing. But also, I mean, I think it's interesting. You point out sort of those interactions with those characters, and it's an observation I'll make a lot later, there are some really interesting character focuses in the game, I think, as well, with other human characters instead of the animal enemies and things like that you face. So we'll probably put a bit of a pin in that, but I think there are elements of this that are more character driven than you would expect maybe at this time, certainly with some of the other titles we were talking about, and I think that also sets it apart. So there's a lot going on.
I think one of the closest games of this year that would be similar but from a completely different cultural perspective is Resident Evil, right? Where you have Jill and you have Chris, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And there's definitely elaborate pre-rendered cinematics in that one as well, and they're presenting this scenario and kind of giving them some characterizations in a very pulpy comic booky way, but it's the Japanese version of that versus the British version. And so there's this sense of, especially on the PlayStation, as Brett mentioned, of this higher fidelity, higher adventure, less stylized approach in games kind of emerging. Even Quake, is, though super gratuitous and semi-realistic from a running perspective, still very over the top and unrealistic too.
Right.
And so when it comes to like, a semi-real thing trying to happen on Earth, those two games in particular are ones that stand out of this era.
Yeah. Another thing it actually calls to mind a little bit is something like John Wick, where you have a lot of world building happening with a few little things that happen. That she's in this place, she's sought after. You basically just have grace notes of a story to sort of describe the environment that she lives in, and we bring in all those other associations with us. And I sort of felt that way watching John Wick, where there was a hotel basically for assassins and, they all pay in Krugerrands and things, there's just like these little bits of things that you're like, oh, okay, this is a whole world. We've built up a whole different world here that looks just like ours, but is clearly not. Of course, when you run into dinosaurs not too much longer after the intro of this game, you do realize we're not exactly in our world, but you are playing with a lot of those sort of pulp, antecedents. So, it's definitely all over this thing.
And going back to one of the earlier topics, I definitely can't understate enough I was just trying to, as you were talking, trying to remember what other games before this, and maybe you can help me, that would have been playing in the same pool, but the sense of like this is a 3D action adventure game in an era. I mean, we played Soul Reaver, which is after this. I'm forgetting.
Yeah,
it was 2000.
No, I don't think it was quite that much later, but
98,
maybe 98. Yeah, something like that.
Anyway, the sort of action and third person action adventure genre, and not platformer like Mario, but action adventure genre was coming into its own, and everyone was also experimenting in that regard. But the thing that I definitely want to index on is the adventure part of that. I still would warrant that especially even in the early levels of this game, you come in and you're just standing in a cave, and there's literally there's some combat with some wolves here and there that kind of give you some nice surprise jump scares or some moments, but you can dispatch them pretty quickly, and that adds a little bit of action. But a lot of the time you're running around in these ancient caves and you're adventuring. You're exploring, you're trying to figure out how to get up to a ledge, you're trying to figure out the navigational puzzles and pulling levers and pushing blocks. And for me, at least, there wasn't anything like that. And I think it's really worth, hitting that really hard, because I think that was another part of its allure. Just, you had some of that in the adventure game genre, the explicit adventure game genre that we've talked a lot about. But obviously a completely different gameplay style, right? This was literally navigating this character through the world. And Resident Evil was, we talked a lot about that too. Of course, it's adventure, it's action adventure as well, but really under survival horror tropes. So,
right, and also
a lot different.
Yeah, and in an environment it's more directly familiar to us, right? It's in a house, right? So it's not really quite as adventure-y, even though it's in a house that maybe is bigger than most of us have spent a lot of time in. But it's certainly it's just a house, right? And it's a haunted house, and we get that. Here we're going to a number of exotic locales, and as you said, we are just in them. And really, the exploration is the reward of the game. The game does keep track of things like finding secrets. I'd kind of forgotten all about that. In fact, there were a couple. I remember how much time I spent finding them when I originally played the game. This time I'm not.
Thrill.
I'm not. You get that little,
that audio still gives me shivers when I get it.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. There's that moment. Something I think. But
just the pure,
you guys actually directly stole in the Indiana Jones Infernal Machine does the same thing when you find a treasure.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Hal loved Tomb Raider.
Oh, I know.
Probably talked about it before.
Yeah, you can tell.
He was a huge fan, and I think he being sort of like inside of LucasArts, Hal Barwood I'm talking about. For those who may not realize, he even though he was sort of within LucasArts, he was the Indiana Jones I guess aficionado, if you will, and he was also the director, project lead for the desktop adventures we were just talking about,
but also the other one,
Fate of Atlantis,
right?
Yeah, and he had earned it. He definitely had earned it. But I think he too, I feel like I have vague memories of talking to him about this. He too felt like Tomb Raider had stolen the crown, and I think Infernal Machine was definitely that crack at like, hey, we need to go after that, because they're kind of eating our lunch in that regard. So Indiana Jones gaming history has been a very interesting one.
Yeah, no kidding.
I have a whole podcast on just that.
Yes, we could.
So yeah, but yeah, I just the sense, like you said, the exploration being the reward is just a good way to put it. I just there was nothing like it. Started playing this game, and I'm being an explorer player type, as I think I've talked about on the podcast before.
No.
This was just exactly what I had been looking for so long, exactly kind of at the right time, as it turns out, and I just couldn't believe it, so just for many of the first few games, I just ate this stuff up, and then they, maybe later in the series we can talk a little bit about some of the games later, but just this one, it was just, it wasn't anything like it, and I just couldn't get enough of just. And it again, as it always happens to me in this podcast when we play games I've played before, playing again last night, I just love running around these caves, these early caves.
Yeah,
because it's just so interesting, and so just the solitude and the sense of like I really want to figure out where to go and what's going on and how does this room work. The city of Vilcabamba specifically, the temple,
right?
That has that facade, where you open those 3 doors.
Yes.
Where you open 2 doors and you're going in and around that thing, and you're going into one door and kind of opening the next one and crawling around the sort of front, the front structure, architecture of it. One of my favorite moments just in a game. And actually was an influence for some of my level design in Infernal Machine too, that particular section.
Oh yeah. Well, I can see that now that you say that. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That particular. Yep. Good level design. We'll probably go deeper in level design.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have several notes.
A lot to talk about.
Yeah, I have several notes. Just some micro moments that I thought were kind of amazing that you're like, oh, that's a really good level design moment. But I had especially been like, at some point we need to talk about level design, because it is, I mean, you worked on a game directly like this pretty soon after it came out. So definitely something I think that fed into choices you made. And then of course you ended up working on the series. So really kind of curious to talk more about that aspect of the game. I love running around in the spaces too. And I also really enjoy the pure fact of having different, having swimming, for example. Well, there'd be probably water in these caves. Let's just put in swimming.
And first time you see that water, you're like, what?
Yep.
Can I get in that?
Yeah, exactly. And well, if you read the manual, you'd know. And I did, because I was like, oh, there's going to be something I'm missing. Turns out it was just that the key binding wasn't great. But yeah, no, it's just all, it's all pretty neat. And it really just serves, it's one of those games that serves this sort of core fantasy and just does whatever it needs to do to serve the core fantasy. And that's something that we've talked about before in connection with other games. And I think a lot of it just comes back to this one in a lot of ways. This is who she is and what she does for a living. So we just need to do whatever supports that. And they would do more of that, especially with Tomb Raider 2, with vehicles and things like that I don't think show up in here.
Oh yeah, like ocean dives,
and boats in Venice and stuff like that.
Yeah, she becomes more James Bond over the years, and a little more Batman as far as like just gadgets and just these higher adventures and action and stuff. And in my opinion, over the course of the series, it starts eroding on sort of the core of what the franchise is, and loses some of its charm because they're trying to do too much sometimes. And then it kind of culminates in the Angel of Darkness,
right? Angel of Darkness, yeah.
Which ends up, kind of, I think, breaking the model in quite a bit. But
yeah, that's not anyway, one I played, because I think I had a copy at some point at work, but never even dug into it because it just did not, critically wasn't something people were talking about as one they had to play. So
but these early core games are really quite something. When we talk about level design, we'll put a pin in this additional kind of subtopic to that. We'll have to talk about the engine and the level design tools and sort of how the levels are constructed. Very interesting and unique compared to a lot of things out there, as well as a way that really isn't used today at all. It's just sort of a product of their engine being grid and block based and angle based, but it wasn't really full 3D construction based like Mario say was, or something like that.
Right.
So there's a lot to talk about there, because it drove the design. The technology drove the design to a really large degree.
Okay.
And I don't know, maybe you might have something to say about that later, but I'd be interested to know any theories you might have about why they went this direction in the engine tech.
I definitely, yeah. No, I know why. I have a good idea why.
You do.
Yeah, and I think it's something we talked about a little bit with Ultima Underworld.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, which is also an early 3D engine, even though it's all software rendered. I think a lot of the same issues come into play, especially with things like clipping and stuff like that, and render distance and what you can see and things like that. So, yeah, there's a whole
grid based.
Yep. Yeah, there's a whole host of issues. Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's. You know what? I know you have company and want to get back to them, so I want to just roll right into feedback.
Yeah.
We had a couple pieces of feedback. Will be a shorter issue this week. Shorter episode. We had a couple pieces of God, now I can't speak. A couple of pieces of feedback sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. For some reason, I'm German now.
Oh my God!
You have the first one, sir.
Oh, I don't even know if I can recover from that now. Sheesh.
I saw the producers last night on the big screen, so it's all springtime for Germany here.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so we just have. I'm just looking at my notes. We scratched the surface, so we have.
I know.
We figure we'll do 4 episodes, right? One for each sort of location,
correct,
locale, and so we'll have plenty of time to hit all of them. We got lots to talk about. So the first, the email that you gave me, subject is games tracking your actions, from our friend Moss. Comrades, I've been meaning to write you for weeks. Your discussion about how games track the actions of players hit me right in the sweet spot. I totally love these kinds of features. I remember the first NHL game that I played, which kept track of how many goals I scored. I was thrilled. And then they used that info to progress my players the next season. I nearly lost my mind. Even the first time I realized I could see how many steps I took in the Final Fantasy game. This kind of stuff gives me life. The more, the better. I don't think games go far enough. Give me everything. How many times have you fired your weapon? How many times have you paused for more than 2 minutes? What's your average play time from when the game boots to when you close it? How fast do you click through dialogue boxes? I want this I want this stuff for real life too. How How many hamburgers have you eaten? Who is the person you've spent the most time with in your life? Who's the second most? How often do you wear your sunglasses? This is endlessly fascinating to me. I'm probably in the minority, but I wish games would track like literally everything and give me that info. Take my privacy. Give me stats. Moss.
I feel like Moss would be a baseball fan because baseball is all about stats.
Oh yeah, of course.
That's the funniest. It's the funniest thing. I watch a lot of baseball. It's not something we talk about a ton on the cast, but it comes up now and again. And I'll be listening to them talk about something, and they'll say, "Wow, this is only the third player since 1973 to hit 16 singles in games in a row," right? And you're like, "What? That's not a stat." And it's like, now we have the data, so we'll just tell you because you can search this stuff now on the internet. Do you realize he takes one extra step to get to first base than the average on the team? I was like, well, who cares? That's funny.
Yeah, that's a good point. Baseball is probably the best at it forever since forever.
Oh yeah, right? It's always been.
Not being a baseball watcher or fan myself, it just feels like stats and the baseball cards and just all of the. I mean, there's whole. Yeah, that's a good point. Sports definitely a good way to. And I mean, I think the interesting thing about games that he's pointing out here and that we talked about last time is just because of the technology behind games. If you invest in that. Goal that Moss is hoping that everyone invests in, you can get literally every little thing if you want to get to it. I mean, it is work.
Right, sure. It's always work, sure.
And that's really kind of where the rubber meets the road on how much you end up getting from a production side of things. But one thing I agree with him, that one thing I've appreciated of late, especially with the sort of trend towards service-based games, whether it be a Dota, or League or Overwatch, is Blizzard for whatever reason isn't quite there yet. I think that they keep the data to themselves, maybe.
Yeah.
I actually wish that there was a lot more data for Hearthstone, for instance. But a lot of the service-based games out there, they do have, because they've been going for so many years, they've built up that data tracking over time, and so you can go pretty deeply, especially in the APIs, into your stat tracking stuff, and it is fascinating. A lot of it's kind of, like you said in the baseball analogy, a lot of it's kind of useless, but it's there, and people really find interesting things to do with it too, especially the fans, with fan web pages where they're using the APIs and things like that. So I think it's a trend that's going to continue. It's just, I think you have to be a game that's alive for more than just a release or two to invest in it,
right? Or that's why alternatively, like we pointed out, I think it has to be something that's actually useful for development in some way, because if it's useful for development, it's worth knowing. So like timing, for example, I mean, something like the number of steps it takes you, how many steps you walked in Final Fantasy or something like that, might be really just, it's a thing that we keep track of from like quest to quest. Like, how long did it take you to get to the next place you're supposed to go? And maybe we should move the map around a little bit to make that not so long, or make it easier to find, or whatever. There could be ways to actually use that information, or just to look at it against people, other people on the dev teams sort of mean, this person's way out on the other side, let's talk to them. This person took a really long time to find their way to that, let's ask them what happened, why that happened. So there can be reasons why you'd want to know that stuff to benefit development and improve the game. And I think you're more likely to see that data. But you're right. The longer something's alive, the more time there is to put those things in, and keep track of that sort of thing.
And I have a perfect example I just thought of to contradict my Blizzard comment from earlier, because the expansion's about to come out and I'm excited about it. World of Warcraft has a whole, the stats, because I've been playing that game since Friends and Family Beta, and it has all the trackings there, especially for my main character that I've played for so long. It's just crazy to look at the stats stuff there. How much gold I've spent, how much gold I've picked up, I've looted, it's just crazy how much gold I've made in the auction house. I mean, it's endless amounts.
How many people you employed in Azeroth to clean up your bull poop?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Tauren maintenance.
Yep, Tauren maintenance costs. Yeah, sure.
But when it comes to the personal stats of that Moss is asking about, I think it's safe to say that I know who I've spent the most time with in my life for the first and second, and I think because of this podcast, I now know the third.
Oh,
it's going to be you, and I'm going to regret every minute of it.
It could be. That's kind of scary to think of. Yeah.
We've been, by the time we're
100. This is 126. And it's more than an hour of our time, often as much as 2 hours that we spend talking, whether or not all of that's on record. That's a lot of hours. That adds up pretty quick. Not to mention 7 years of working together. So although I guess we didn't work closely together that whole time. Wow, that's a lot. That's scary. So thanks. I won't sleep tonight. I have the second email. It's from Eric Bartozak. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, Eric. The title, the subject is Prey, Alien Isolation, Tim Longo. He says, hey, Brett and Tim. Just listened to the Prey bonus episode, and Tim mentioned Alien Isolation and kind of hinted at his fear of the xenomorph. I got a third of the way through Prey and literally cannot physically play it anymore because I feel like I'm being terrorized by every object in that world. It is absolutely anxiety-inducing. Love the game, though. Quite interesting with a good story. Just can't play it. As for Alien Isolation, kind of same story. I own it, all the DLC, it's installed already, and I can never play it because the idea of being hunted by that alien is a big no-go. Capital N, capital G. I am terrified of that thing. I'm a huge horror genre fan and a massive Alien and Ridley Scott fan, but still can't play through this thing. It is fascinating. Love both these games and genres and can't physically get through them because I'm scared to death. Thanks always for your great podcast, Eric, who is also Wayun number 6 on my streams. So thanks. Hey, Wayun. Good to hear from you. I mean, I will say Alien Isolation is the most anxiety I've ever felt playing a video game. I was so terrified throughout. Playing in broad daylight. The other game was PT, but that was a fairly short experience, and I played it in a couple of hours or something like that, an hour, I don't even know. And it was terrifying, but there's a different sort of anxiety with Alien Isolation of just constant not knowing if this is the time it's going to get me. And it's never ending. And although there was a brief period where you're sort of a little bit more empowered in that game, it doesn't last, and then you feel even worse. So it's just, I'm totally there with you, Eric. I get it. I totally get it. I played some more Prey since we talked about it, and I also reached a point where, so you described the phantoms as sort of mini bosses. Well, I've met the next one, and it's about the same size, but it's about 10 times as deadly. And oh man, it is rough. I don't know what they are either. It just says question mark over its head. So I'm like, oh man, this is so terrifying.
Is the one that shot a fire at you, or is this?
No, it's a different one. So those were the phantoms that shoot the fire. So there's another one beyond that. That's it was rough.
That it just dawned on me that there's some similarities to the enemies in Eco with those things.
Oh, that's true.
Not obviously the mimicking part, but
the inky black and the shape
kind of coming out of pools and whatever.
Right. Good call.
Yeah. I like that. He's not. You and he are not convincing me on starting Isolation anytime soon, if ever. The thing is I really want to play it. In the end, as you were reading his email, the other thing that dawned on me that I'd be curious to know, and probably will never find this person, but I wonder if it has the same effect on somebody who has never. Again, I don't know why you would buy the game if you haven't, but if you don't know what the Alien franchise is or what a xenomorph is, I wonder if it has the same effect. Because I think for me, a lot of psychological impact I'm having. I have to think
it would, and the reason I would have to think it would is because
they do a good job.
They do such a good job of having the death animations. You really feel it. You feel like every scene you've seen where somebody gets it from the alien, but in all sorts of different ways, because they can just go, I mean, sort of like, it's something we haven't talked about yet with Lara, and something we'll talk about at some point, but the same thing where Lara has this these death animations, and you have this sense that you need to protect her. It's something that I think we'll have to talk about later. Anyway, that's where Tim's connection cut out, and we couldn't seem to get him back. So we're going to have to call it there. Thanks for the email, Moss and Eric. We appreciate hearing from you. So, of course, for the next time, we're going to play up through Greece, through the Greece levels. I think there are 4 or 5 levels in that section, so we're going to play all of those. And, of course, you can send your email feedback to devgameclub@gmail.com. You can find us on the web at Brett_Duville, at Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end, and, of course, the podcast at devgameclub. For those who are interested, I have revived my blog at brettduville.com. I haven't put the old blog up yet, but there will be links to those things as well. But I finally got around to posting some new stuff. There are a couple of articles up there already if you are interested in that. Thanks so much for joining us this week, and good night.
Good night.